At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Adrian, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Dr. Doug. How are you? Lovely. It's very early here, probably afternoon your time.
I was going to say good afternoon. I know how that goes. So you're in Australia.
I'm in Sydney. I'm in the Blue Mountains, which is just west of Sydney. I live on a lovely 10-acre garden, which I have built from scratch. It was a bare paddock when I started, and it's now the most glorious botanical garden. So that's one of my life passions. I like to say I've spent my life growing plants and people.
Okay, so tell the audience your history. I mean, there's always a story. You know, there's always a background story on that journey to where you are today. So I'd love for you to share with the audience.
I'll try and put that in the context of your show, which is, you know, like the relationship between business and personal development. And also, I love your sayings about, you know, to inspire. So I've pretty much dedicated my life to trying to be an inspiration to people. When I started very early on in life, I realized that it was easy to be a capitalist and it was easy to be a mystic. But to be a capitalistic mystic or a mystical capitalist was the challenge that I set myself for two reasons. Number one, that I believe that the whole of life is spiritual. We can't break it up into, you know, spirit and matter. And so I wanted to create a spirituality that was very pragmatic and practical. And I also wanted to build businesses that were based on spiritual principles. So that's pretty much what I've done in my life. I love to say I've never been an employee in my life. I've been self-employed from probably about the age of 10. And I've owned many businesses over the years, everything from being a one-man band to my final corporate business was a very large Australian national firm with 185 employees and 11 offices. So I've straddled the full spectrum, but always tried to be an employer of choice and to build teams based in harmony, working together and on sound spiritual principles.
Well, and you know, that is so important. And one of the things I have found as I worked with my clients for a little while when I was doing the business consulting was to let them know that, you know what, the principles that we're going to talk about here in business are going to apply to your life. And ultimately, what you're doing in your life is going to affect your business. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward really to talking today about life, individuals, and what's going on. And you've written some books. You have a very focused agenda. I'd love for you to share with the audience that agenda, just as a background for what we're going to talk about.
Let me just pick up on that point you just made, because I think it could lead us into it. I believe that your business is your life, and your life is your business. And I think the beauty of people who are entrepreneurs and to be an entrepreneur, you don't necessarily have to, you know, own a corporation. You could be a tradesperson, you can be an artist. But when you learn to approach your life as a business with the same principles, especially holistic principles, it's completely different. Because I think for me, my basic focus or message, as you like to call it, is that you do create your own reality, but there's no, in our whole education system, there's never been a course called Life 101. If you think of, you know, we can go through the whole first 20 years of our lives being educated, but nobody ever sits down and says, okay, this is how life works. These are the basic principles. Now, of course, some people are brought up in different religions or paradigm belief systems. But I'm talking, so what I set myself out to do was to really understand, how does life work? What are the fundamental principles that make life work so that you can experience success by your intention, by working with it? Of course, now today it's much more commonplace with positive psychology and so many people. But I'm talking about, I'm probably late 60s, early 70s when I really started focusing on these ideas. And so it's been my theme or thread all through my life of learning. And I still consider myself, you know, a novice trying to learn exactly how life does work. And I think the other thing that I have learned is that you can only learn from life, from experience. It's not book learning. It's not academic. Nobody else can really live your life for you. Yes, we can learn from other wise people, both living and dead, but ultimately it's, for me anyway, it's your personal relationship with your own life. And you need to watch it very, very astutely and acutely every day as to what's going on. And I find that it becomes a beautiful intimacy, which I unfortunately think a lot of people do not share with their own life. A lot of people are estranged. You know, some people think life is a bitch, or life is hard, or life is difficult, or it's not fair, or, you know, I'm badly done by. So they never really get to the point of having what I call is this lovely romance or intimacy with your own life, so that it's a one-to-one relationship. And for me, it's a partnership. It's a business partnership. I want to build a successful business with my life, meaning that it works depending on whatever your goals are. I mean, my goals very much are like yours, which is I want to inspire, I want to uplift, I want to elevate, I want to try and do some good. But one still needs to be successful and efficient in achieving that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And yeah, I've never heard it put that way, but it's making so much sense. You're right. And when we talk about running our life as a business, you know, the point is how do we have a successful life?
Exactly.
And I love what you're talking about here. And I know you've written a couple of books. I know you've got a trilogy that you're writing, but you haven't come out with the third book yet. But that trilogy, Temple of Understanding, and you've got what, the paradigm shift, and the personal sovereignty, and the Tao
Yeah,
tuning.
tuning. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So if we start at the beginning, personal sovereignty is all about being able to make your own authentic decisions. The basic problem that I see in this society is that we are so influenced from a very early age. Everybody, you think about it, you decide you want to do something and you go and share that with your loved one or a friend or whatever. What's the first thing everybody says? Oh, that won't work. Oh, you can't do that. Or, you know, people don't generally think, well, that's fantastic, Doug, have a go at it. Yeah, you know, rah, rah. Everyone always has to have a negative comment. And particularly in this day of what I call mass media and social media, we are so influenced. I feel so sorry for the really young people who, I mean, influenced. I was watching a show here in Australia a few weeks ago about teen influencers. So there were one child, this is an influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers, was 4 years old. You know, so obviously he's
Wow.
4 years old. He's obviously being produced and directed by his mother, but
Yes.
still his audience. So from this very early age now, people are being shepherded into this clone mentality. So personal sovereignty is all about being able to be unique, authentic, honoring yourself, and being able to make authentic decisions. So one of the things that I say is that humanity is very bad at making decisions, meaning a lot of us are afraid of making decisions. You know, we want to go and ask everybody else, what should I do? Rather than, what I've learned is that if you've really got a very, very serious and important decision to make, don't discuss it with anybody until you have made your own decision. So you're not influenced. Then, yes, go and seek advice or talk to people, but make sure that you come up with what you want to do first. And to do that, you need to go away, you need to go within, you need to get silent and not deliberate too much on the intellectual side of your mind, but to go in and find out what feels good. So one of the things that I talk a lot about in personal sovereignty is what I call the corporate structure of consciousness. Now, we have many aspects of ourselves and we need to learn to unite them in a harmonious way and recognize which voice is which. So you have the voice of reason, which you need to listen to. You also have your intuition, which is a completely different story. You have a gut feeling. You know, sometimes you get this feeling of that something is right or wrong, and that's very visceral and in your gut. You also have your higher consciousness, depending on how you want to define that or what particular religion or philosophy you want to adhere to, which I don't really like going into, because again, I think that's a very individual thing.
Yes.
But we all have this higher knowing. So you've got all these different voices, and they all have a role to play. If you get up in the morning and you need to do a to-do list, or you and I need to arrive at this particular point in time, both at our computers, we need to use logic. We need to use reason. We need to use time and computers and watches and everything else. But on the other hand, if you're making a very, very important decision, sometimes you have to leave rationality aside and just go into that inner space. Again, whatever you want to call it, you can call it your heart or your soul or your whatever. I don't think that really matters. But you need to be able to take that journey to go within. So that's what personal sovereignty is all about.
Okay.
And then once you make that decision, in other words, and that's why going back a little bit why I called it a better business. If you think about a business, the first thing you got to do is have a business plan. You have some sort of goal or desire of a product or service that you want to deliver. So in your life, you really need to know where you are going, where you want to go. And so another one of my favorite sayings is decisions determine destiny. Once you've made that decision, once you've decided where you want to go, what you want to achieve, you need to learn how to do it, how to execute that decision, how to bring those decisions onto the plane of reality, which is our daily life, which is what we call life. And so that's what dial tuning is all about. It's that ability to go to generate the wave and then ride the wave successfully so that you are not struggling. It's not hard. You're not disappointed. You're not failing. In other words, now I'm not saying that. And so I don't know. Do you know the term ikigai?
No. Could you explain to the audience what that is?
Okay. So it's very related to the concept of flow, which means that so for flow to occur, this is that what we call it being in the zone. So it's a very common concept now in elite sport, in executive mentoring, in life coaching, of being in the zone, being in the flow, getting in the flow, being in that space. And so dial tuning is the art of flow. So it's also so my argument is, well, we don't just want to be in that zone of flow in occasional peak experiences of rock climbing or, you know, when we're in that very, very elite sport situation. I believe that it should be our natural state of life. In other words, we want to spend as much time in that zone of flow as possible. So we need to understand the requirements of how do we get there. And the first thing is focus. So you need to focus. You need to be able to go within. You need to focus on what you're doing. Second, you need to be doing something that is just a little bit beyond your grasp. It has to be in that Goldilocks zone of not being too easy, because the brain just then turns off and goes into boredom. It also can't be unattainable, because then you don't feel like you're going to achieve it. So it's like you're just striving for that extra little bit of personal best. You know, I want to improve myself a little bit each time to get to that next point, to that next point. So for me, it's all about, I want to become a better version of who I am. It's got nothing to do with anybody else. I'm not comparing myself to anybody else. I'm just comparing myself to yesterday. So if I'm doing a podcast, for example, with you, I want it to be better than the one I may have done yesterday, or whatever we're doing. If we're cooking, you know, we just want to be able to do it that little bit better. So they're the requirements of being in the flow. And the third one is doing something that you love, something that you're passionate about, something that you believe in, something that's important to you. If you have those three ingredients, then you can be in the flow, or in what I call the zone of flow, to propel your life and yourself to a better place.
That's not always easy for people.
No. And that's why dial tuning goes into, I mean, I've just given you a 3-minute summary. And look, it's Doug, the reason it's not easy is because these concepts run 100% contrary to, and that's why I call it a paradigm shift. And I better just briefly explain what a paradigm is. So if you think of a fish in water or us in air, we're not really aware of the air, but you're very aware of it if it's taken away from you.
Right.
So a paradigm is a belief system within which we live. Every single human being lives within a paradigm. We also have collective paradigms. We all basically live in the Western worldview. And so that is a belief system, a set of beliefs that we are brought up. And again, it doesn't really matter which religion or morality or even country or society, you're in America, I'm in Australia, but we're all part of the West, you know, and that Western paradigm actually started back in the Greeks, through the Roman Empire, through the Judeo-Christian ethic, all the way now through to, you know, the world that we live in, which is probably dominated by the United States and, you know, the great American dream. But fundamentally, it hasn't really changed that much in 2,500 years. It's a collective paradigm.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry, just to finish, and that paradigm runs contrary to the beliefs of, or the system of flow. That's why it's hard.
Okay, and it runs contrary because as you talk about Tao tuning, I'm assuming that that's more of an Eastern Asian type of concept, and it's interesting as I talk to different people, that seems to come up a lot as we start talking about quality of life and those type of things. Now, I spent 9 months in Thailand. I'm heading back in a month. Okay, and so it's fascinating to me. In fact, coming back to the U.S. has been really uncomfortable just because of the attitude and as you say, the paradigm of thought process and so forth.
That's what I'm talking about. You know, if you're in Asia, they have a totally different worldview. It's a much more gentle, flowing, gracious, you know, whereas Western, we're much more rah-rah, got to do this, you know, we're very, but let me just digress for a minute and go back to that point you made, that it's, so basically what I do in Tao tuning is to show not only is it an ancient Eastern concept, the Tao, but nuclear physics, you know, all from Einstein to, you know, all of the nuclear physicists arrive at that same conclusion. So it's not just an Eastern concept or religion or philosophy or worldview. It is now a very Western mainstream nuclear physics reality of the way we now understand how the world works. For example, we believe in the solidity. You're sitting on a chair, I'm sitting on a chair, but we know that 99.9% of that is empty space because of nuclear physics. We also know that, going back to what I was talking about with the Greeks, is that they wanted to find the atom, this indivisible particle that was the building block of matter, that everything, you know, there had to be this atom. Again, nuclear physics has proven that there is no atom, that there are actually probability waves, you know, of particles and waves and photons. So it's a very, very different reality. The third thing that nuclear physics has proven is, and this is why they have double-blind experiments, is that the attitude of the scientist will influence the outcome of the experiment, meaning that there is this connectedness between the observer and the observed. Now, as you say, all of these things are ancient Eastern philosophies and beliefs. Now, they haven't infiltrated Western paradigm, but they are cutting edge Western science. And that is my point in our tuning, is that we need to adapt our philosophy, we need to adapt our religion, we need to adapt our cosmology to what we're discovering in science, not to what the Bible said 5,000 years ago or, you know, a religion that's outdated, because it is no longer appropriate to what we know. The mere fact that you and I can sit here and talk from Australia to America is due to the fact that we have discovered electromagnetic energy. We now know how to use it via the internet, via our smartphones, via everything that we do. Fossil fuels, cars, you know, solar energy. We learn these things and our lives have 100% radically changed in the last, 50 years. But our ideology, the way we live, what we believe in, hasn't kept pace with that technological and scientific discovery.
What has brought this about? I mean, you know, it's fascinating that I look at present time here in America, okay, and everything that's going on, and I look a number of years ago where that wasn't even a part of our society, and I don't know what you're experiencing over there in Australia, may or may not be similar, but what brought this about? What brought about the changes where we went from kindness and love and concern to fighting and anger and all of this stuff that's going on?
Well, that is the question. And as I said, I have devoted my life to understanding why and how this came about. And I guess I was a little prophetic and early in seeing that this was happening, and that you talk about the Temple of Understanding, which is the name of the trilogy. And that's why I call it the Temple of Understanding, because what my argument is that we live within a gross misunderstanding. So who we are as human beings is not who we have been brought up to believe we are. We are fundamentally completely different. And that is why we need to go back to what I call the atomistic paradigm, because the atom was an indivisible particle of matter. Human beings in the Western paradigm live as we are completely separate. I am separate from you, and it's a zero-sum game. So if I'm going to win, you've got to lose. There's not enough. There's a scarcity of resources. I've got to take from you. So it's a very selfish world because of this belief in separation, because of this belief that we are. Do you know that the number one pandemic, this has been declared officially by WHO, the number one pandemic in the Western world is loneliness and depression. Now, we live in the most affluent society that has ever existed. We are the most interconnected society that has ever existed. And yet this is a pandemic throughout the Western world where people feel lonely, alone, isolated, alienated. If you look at all of the problems, I mean, let's look at America for a minute, but as you say, it's pretty much the same everywhere.
Yeah.
But all of these are merely symptoms of neurosis. You know, what motivates a person to go out and just kill randomly? What motivates a person to, be a terrorist? What motivates, at the opposite end of the spectrum, bankers and Wall Street people to, do these incredible things? What motivates people to want to try and control and dominate a whole population like what's going on right now in America? I mean, it is purely this neurotic need for what I say, more is never enough. I mean, you hear about these billionaires, I'm not going to mention any names, who get upset because, they've already got a couple of $100 billion, but they lose one or two and they get very upset. I mean, so my saying is more is never enough. If you need more money, it'll never be enough. If you need more approval. And so if you look at, for example, the celebrity world, how many celebrities who experience incredible success commit suicide or on drugs, substance abuse, sexual abuse, whatever. So if you are addicted to any of those things, which can be fame, can be fortune, can be money, can be power, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. More is never going to be enough, because like any drug, the more you have, the more you're going to need for your next fix. So the reason to answer your question, that it is all falling apart is because the paradigm is wrong. And that's why I'm calling it, it's a misunderstanding of who we are as human beings, which really, we are one family. We are one species. We are all connected, and we need to be connected to the earth. We need to be connected to nature. We need to be connected to animals and understand that all life is sacred. Every life form is sacred. So it's not only that this atomistic sense of separation separates us from each other, but it also separates us from our lives, as we were talking about before. So most people don't have a holistic relationship with their own life. They don't have a holistic relationship with life in general, meaning the planet, Earth, the species of humanity. They don't have a relationship with Gaia, the Earth. They don't have so we're not integrated. We're not connected. We don't seem to have that ability to embrace. And I'm not talking about a physical embrace. I'm talking about as you said before, we've lost that ability to be kind. We've lost that ability to love. And I personally don't like using the word love, because I think it's been bastardized so much that, you talk about loving people, but at the end of the day, love is incredibly important, and love does not have to be romantic. Love does not even need to be for another being or another person. Love should just be an expression of who I am. Going back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, we need to love our work. We need to love our business. We need to love getting up in the morning and what are we going to do? I need to love talking to you. You need to love talking to me. You know what I mean? It's that you've got to have that fire and passion and enjoyment. And I think maybe that's what's happened, that maybe a lot of people have lost that sense of purpose, that sense of meaning, that sense of fulfillment. And so they're empty. And because they're empty, they're looking for something to fill this emptiness, which usually is some neurotic pursuit rather than a holistic pursuit.
So what do we do? I mean, you've done very well in explaining what the problem is and so on and so forth. But the question is, what do we do to turn this whole thing around?
Well, I say exactly that. Just turn around. Just turn around, because we are so much on this treadmill. And now I am going back to what you were talking about before time, where we're really talking about the Western paradigm here. We are so much on this treadmill of go, 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 that we just don't have time. I mean, it's that old saying, stop and smell the roses. And I was writing quite recently something about this, and I said, look, just the answer to this question, the question was, in very simple, easy terms, what's the one thing people can do? And my answer was turn around, literally turn around. So I'm saying, stop and enjoy that morning coffee. You might be walking to work. Stop and enjoy for a minute. Maybe before you leave, gaze into the face of a loved one, whether it's a child or a parent or a spouse or whatever, it doesn't really matter. Just take that. And look, it doesn't need, I think the basic problem, as I said at the very beginning, is that we've separated spirituality and reality. I'll get to the spirituality when my life works. I'll worry about all of that stuff when, no, you've got to do it the other way around, So it's like, if you don't have time to just enjoy your life. So one of my favorite techniques, if you see a flower, stop for 10 seconds and take a really deep breath. Don't just smell it for a second, take that, breathing. So meditation to me is not a spiritual exercise. It's a neurological exercise. It's a health thing. So we need to turn around. We need to stop. We need to just say, look, I still want to be successful. I'm still going to have my to-do list. I still work, 12, 14 hours every day of my life, but I make sure that there are many, many pauses. I make sure that I consciously, many times a day, go, what am I doing? Okay, I'm talking. So I'm going to focus on that. Or I need to just sit. And when I say just sit, look, I'll give you what I think what is the easiest and most essential exercise. And that is to just sit and look at something. Now, right now, I'm looking not at you, I'm looking out at, because it's just dawn. So I just focus on a tree. As I said before, I live in a most beautiful garden that I have created. And I will do this every dawn, every dusk, is what I call a mindfulness walk. So I'm not going out there to look at all the things I've got to do. I don't let myself do that. I'm not going to get upset about all the things that, are wrong. I am just going to enjoy that moment, and I'm going to stop and look at and focus at a flower or focus at a tree or focus on a branch and really just stop and focus. Now, we don't need, going back to meditation, you don't need to do that for half an hour. You don't need to sit with your legs crossed. You don't need to chant. You don't need to pray. You don't need to do any of that. But you do need to just.
I'm going to stop you. I'm going to stop you. You just froze. So would you repeat what you were saying? Because you just froze for just a couple of seconds.
Okay, so you need to be able to stop and just focus with your vision and just to absorb, to take in that moment. So I think to probably answer your question in a nutshell is be here now, what I call being now. So get off the treadmill, get off the time trajectory of I'm going somewhere, I've got people to go, places to meet, all that stuff, and I just need to practice the discipline of being now. What is happening right now in my life? What is in front of me? Watch it, focus on it, observe it, and be present.
Okay, so I'm getting the impression that you're not real favorable towards meditation. I happen to be very, very favorable about meditation.
Oh, no, I
some of those
meditate
other
every day.
processes. Oh,
No,
okay, good. So could
I
you
meditate
explain what you
every
were
day.
meaning? Okay, so explain a little
Okay,
bit
I'm
more about
saying
what you
that
were saying.
Okay, no, I think meditation that's absolutely essential. I'm not against meditation. What I'm saying is that people don't. I want people to see meditation as essential as breathing. So what I'm saying is that a lot of people reject meditation because they see it as an Eastern religious tradition, whereas I'm saying meditation is as I said, as it's important as breathing. One needs to meditate because meditating is emptying the mind. It's stopping, it's slowing down, it's getting to that peace and to that inner state of consciousness where the mind, what I call the yama yama of the mind, is not racing. No, I've been meditating every day for over 50 years.
Well, and now Western science is catching up with Eastern concepts because definitely now they are showing scientifically the incredible value of meditation and how it literally is not only affecting our mental health, but it's also affecting our physical health. And they're showing how meditation can literally help to heal physical ailments. And it's amazing to me to see that. And yet it's there and it's real. And so when we talk about, making a change, how do we, I mean, you have this whole focus here, but how on earth are we going to see a change take place on the level that we're going to see a different paradigm come into place again, or perhaps an original paradigm that somehow we lost?
Okay, well, two things. Let me just go finish on what you were just saying there about meditation. Now, the other thing that I find really interesting about meditation is that we all experience problems. We want to achieve something, we hit a challenge or a roadblock or an adversity, and we need to come to terms with it. Now, most of us, or again, the Western paradigm will be, okay, sit down, do your pros and cons, think about it, blah, blah, blah. I believe that you've got to go into meditation. You've got to silence the mind. You've got to stop thinking, and you've got to go into because the other bit about meditation that isn't emphasized enough is that it is this route into the core of your being. If you're in your mind, if you're thinking, that's where you are. You're up in your mind. But via meditation, when you stop the mind, you can go to a whole different place.
Yes, true.
And in that space, and this is what I talk about a lot in Dao tuning, I call it this space. So in this space, you can negotiate and come to terms with this problem, with this adversity, because it's just a challenge that you need to understand. And once in meditation, and I've experienced this so many times in my life, not only do we become calm, not only do we get out of the agitation and the restlessness and the yama yama and, you know, all of anxiety, we also, once we get to that calmness, we seem to be able to see the problem differently. In other words, we arrive at a different space, at a different perspective, at a different attitude. And in that space, the world changes. Our world changes. And miraculously, the next day, probably the next morning, and quite often this will happen to me if I'm really concerned about something. Normally I'll meditate at dawn every morning, but sometimes if I'm really, I might wake up in the middle of the night, have to go into this very, very, very deep space. And it's almost like engineering. You are rewiring the world in meditation. And I know when I get there, and all of a sudden I just know the next morning the universe is going to somehow fix it. So meditation is also an unbelievable tool to make your life right. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I think as we make our lives right, I really believe it's one at a time, but ultimately that's going to affect other people and they'll start to make their lives right. And in the short minutes that we have left, you've created a garden. You mentioned it briefly, but you're in a mountainous area and you say you have created literally a garden.
Well, it's more than a garden. And for me, it is a working demonstration. And this might also answer your last question of, you know, how do we do this or where do we go? For me, it's a working demonstration of the way that I believe humans need to live. To go back to the very beginning of this conversation and how you asked the question before, how did we end up where we are now with all of this unkindness and violence and war and all the things that are, you know, a $34 trillion debt. I mean, there is no country that can exist. We all know we cannot live beyond our means. You are the wealthiest country ever, wealthiest empire that has ever existed on the face of the planet. And yet you have a $34 trillion debt. That's another aspect of this neurotic consciousness living beyond its means on this treadmill where we just have to have more. We have to have more. We have to have more. You know, well, like, no, you can't. Anyway, sorry. So for me, the garden is a practical working demonstration of the way we need to live because we got lost in the Industrial Revolution, urbanization, moving to the cities, becoming disassociated from nature and the seasons. And, you know, children don't know where eggs come from. Children don't, you know, we are so, people who live in high rise are so disassociated from the reality of the earth, from life, that we are completely divorced now. We need to go back to nature. I don't care if that's walking in a park. I don't care if you've got a pot plant on your veranda in your high rise. I don't care if you've got, you know, whatever you've got. I mean, this is an extreme experiment, but it's not just a garden, it's an ecosystem. I wanted to demonstrate that in 50 years, we could regenerate the planet. And that's what I've done. I've been planting this garden now for 50 years. As I said, it was a bare, dead paddock when I started. I don't know if you know what a paddock is. In Australian, it means just had 2 cows on it, which had trampled. It was dead. It was completely dead.
Yeah.
Now it is got beautiful. So it's not just a garden; it's an ecosystem, and I personally feel very, very connected to it. So I now understand that Aboriginal, which is not just Australian Aborigines, all of the ethnic cultures that we exterminated had this sense of belonging to the land, of a sense of peace with the land, a sense of connection with the land. And so they didn't pollute. They didn't, I mean, many of these societies didn't even have words for murder and rape because they just didn't do it, because they understood that they were a tribe. They understood that the health and wellness of one being depended on the tribe and vice versa. So it's a very, very different paradigm. And that's what I'm trying to demonstrate. Not everybody needs to have a 10-acre garden like I do. I mean, I have to work, but I love it. But I think every single human being needs to find their own path back into nature, because nature will be the healer. Nature will help us to come back to this sanity and love and beauty. I mean, if you walk in nature, you just feel relaxed, you feel happy, you can't help but feel grateful, because as soon as you perceive the beauty, gratitude arises spontaneously. And when you're in that state of grace, gratitude, graciousness, you don't want to kill, you don't want to rob, you don't want to rape, you don't want to maim, you don't want to do anybody injury, because you're basically happy and content within yourself and very grateful that you're alive. So you have this very precious, sacred relationship with life. And so for me, I think, to just conclude, the number one principle, law, whatever you want to call it, is do not injure. You know, live your life as much as you can without intentional injury. Now, I believe we all have a very intrinsic sense of right and wrong. We know when we're doing the right thing, we know when we're doing the wrong thing, you know, but it sometimes takes a bit of guts and courage to go, no, I'm going to do the right thing. That might be apologizing. That might be making amends for something that you have unintentionally or inadvertently done wrong, but you've got to make it right. You know, sometimes you got to be generous, or you've got to be loving, or you've got to be kind, or you've got to help that, you know, there's a nobility. Like my last blog, which was actually about the American presidential race that's going on at the moment, so you might find it interesting. And so there were two. The first one was called Nobility of Being, where I am saying that to rule is to serve, and that really what happened, to really be a ruler, you have to genuinely want to serve the people, you know. And so I called the presidential debate the residential deflate, because these two guys really need to be in residences somewhere where they can be, I mean, it was unbelievable. So to me, it epitomized where we are at as humanity. That whole presidential debate in 90 minutes epitomized for me everything that's wrong. You know, here are two men vying for the most important role, job, functionary, whatever you want to call it, on the planet today. And it was a complete and utter farce and disgrace. So if that's where we're headed, if that's the epitome of humanity, yeah, we're in trouble.
Okay, so as we close, and you've said a lot of things, and I don't mind you repeating yourself on some of your ideas, what is the message that you want to share with the audience? Just the short message.
The shortest message is the oneness of life. We are all interconnected. Human beings, or humanity, is not separate from life, is not separate from nature. We are not better than. Every single life form is sacred. Life is sacred. Life is to be cherished, to be enjoyed, to have fun, to be successful, to be abundant. It's a gift, you know. And I guess the best example I can use is somebody gives you a gift, you don't even unwrap it, and you put it aside, you put it in your cupboard, and you forget about it. Or do you unwrap it? Do you enjoy, you know, a little kid, I can't wait to unwrap it all. Oh, wow. You know, we have lost that exuberance, that fun, that enjoyment of life. Life is a gift. Enjoy it.
Amen. Amen. Adrian, thanks so much. This has been fascinating. And it's interesting how here you are on the other side of the world, and yet you're experiencing the same thing that I'm experiencing over here on this side. And
Isn't it
it's
amazing?
yeah, it is amazing. And I appreciate the fact that you talk about the fact that this paradigm which we're experiencing has got to change. And hopefully, even if it's one by one,
Yeah.
we're able to do that. So I appreciate everything you've said,
Yeah.
folks. I appreciate you listening, and hope you've enjoyed this, and hope you'll join us again soon.